He'd interrogated men with guns to their heads, but when he asked the silent girl in his marble hall, "Who hurt you?" it was the first time in his life he was afraid of the answer. The night stretched long over Naples, the city humming with the kind of sin that never sleeps. From a balcony of the Moretti estate, Pedro Moretti could see the sea glittering under streetlights, as if mocking him with its calm. His empire was steady, his enemies quiet, and yet his mind felt like a battlefield. Power came with ghosts, and he carried too many. Inside, the sound of polished shoes echoed against marble as his men moved through the house. Bodyguards, accountants, soldiers. Each one owed him loyalty. None dared look him in the eye. But that night, it wasn't business that kept him awake. It was a whisper he'd overheard in the kitchen 2 nights ago. The new girl doesn't talk. He hadn't meant to notice her. He never noticed the staff. But something in that sentence lingered, like a splinter beneath his skin. Downstairs in the half-lit kitchen, Nancy worked in silence. She was small but not fragile, her movements careful, efficient, almost reverent as she cleaned the long oak table. The other maids avoided her, whispering that she was strange, that she didn't speak, that she'd been brought in from somewhere dark. She wore long sleeves even in summer, and when a glass slipped from her hand and shattered, she froze, as if waiting for pain. Pedro happened to be walking in at that exact moment. The sound of breaking glass made him turn, and there she was, motionless, breath shallow, eyes wide like a cornered deer. He expected fear. He didn't expect the silence that followed to gut him. He dismissed the guards with a flick of his wrist. Go. When the room emptied, he approached her. His shoes clicked slowly on the tile. She didn't move. He stopped just in front of her. You work here? He asked, his voice low, almost a growl. She nodded once. Why don't you talk? No answer. Her throat moved, but no sound came. She bent to pick up the glass, cutting her palm on a shard. Leave it. His tone sharpened, but she ignored it, continuing to gather the pieces, blood beating at her fingertip. He crouched beside her, something he hadn't done for anyone in years, and took her wrist gently. Her breath caught. His thumb brushed against the cut. Who hurt you? He asked. The words came out softer than he intended. Not an interrogation, not a threat. Just a question. She didn't look at him, but her silence answered anyway. The tremor in her hand said everything. The way she avoided his eyes, the way her lips parted as if to speak, but didn't. It told a story of pain he recognized too well. For a moment, he hated himself for wanting to know it. He let go first. Get that cleaned, he said, rising to his full height again. His voice was cold now, trying to reassert control. You're bleeding on my floor. Nancy stood slowly, clutching her palm to her chest. She turned to leave, her footsteps light as dust, but before she disappeared through the door, she glanced back. Just once, and in that single look, something inside him cracked. That night, Pedro couldn't sleep. He poured himself whiskey and stood before the window again, the city lights trembling like stars trapped under glass. He didn't know why he cared, but he did. In the dim reflection of the window, he saw himself, a man who ruled everything but couldn't control the ache in his chest. Somewhere downstairs, he imagined her cleaning her wound, her silence hanging in the air like prayer. He whispered to no one, "Who hurt you?" again. This time, the question felt like a promise. If someone looked you in the eyes and asked who hurt you, would you be able to tell them the truth, or would your silence say it for you? Comment your thoughts below. What do you think Nancy S. silence is hiding? Morning crept through the villa in thin, gold bands of light. Pedro hadn't slept. His glass of whiskey stood untouched on the desk, condensation forming like sweat. He told himself it was foolish, that he had more important things to worry about than a quiet girl with frightened eyes. But every time he blinked, he saw her cut hand and the tremor that followed his question. By the time he descended to the kitchen, the staff had already dispersed. Only Nancy remained, washing dishes in silence, her sleeves rolled just enough for him to see the bandage he'd ordered the medic to leave for her. He stopped at the doorway, watching her. She moved with careful rhythm, water, soap, rinse, as if each gesture was a prayer for invisibility. Eat something, he said finally. She startled, nearly dropping a plate. Turning, she nodded quickly, wiped her hands, and reached for a piece of bread on the counter. He noticed she didn't take a seat, always standing, always ready to run. He stepped closer, voice low. "You shouldn't work with a cut like that." Her eyes lifted to his, gray, unsure, waiting for permission to disappear. He exhaled, frustration tightening his chest. "Sit down, Nancy." It was the first time he'd said her name aloud. It tasted strange on his tongue, soft like a confession. She sat hesitant. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one to her. She didn't touch it. "Don't worry. I don't poison my own people." A flicker of amusement crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then the sound shattered. 3 gunshots outside, quick and clean. Pedro reacted instantly, pulling his gun from the holster beneath his jacket. "Stay here." He moved like instinct, every step precise, his eyes cold now. The king of Naples restored. Nancy froze. The echo of gunfire brought memories she'd buried. Men shouting in another language, the smell of oil and blood, the sound of her own voice breaking before it vanished forever. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Through the window, she saw shadows moving near the gates, figures darting between cars. And then another sound, the glass door at the back bursting inward. She ducked behind the counter as a masked man entered, gun raised. Time slowed. The intruder's boots squealed on the tiles. He barked something in Italian, a name, maybe, and grabbed her arm. Pedro appeared behind him, silent as death, and fired once. The man dropped. Smoke curled upward, gray against the sunlight. Nancy trembled, pressed against the counter, eyes locked on the corpse. Pedro's voice cut through the ringing silence. "He came for me, not you." But even he didn't believe it. The mark on the man's wrist, a snake tattoo, belonged to the Ferrani family. Rival territory. He holstered his weapon, stepped toward her slowly. "You're safe now." She shook her head, tears spilling soundlessly. "Safe?" The word felt foreign. He crouched beside her again, second time in 2 nights, and touched her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "This world," he said quietly, "doesn't forgive weakness, but I don't tolerate fear in my house." Something in his tone made her flinch. He softened. "I didn't mean you. I meant me." He stood, calling to his guards. "Clean this up. No police." They obeyed without question. When the floor was spotless again, only the faint smell of gunpowder remained, and the echo of her silent scream. Pedro turned to her. "Pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight." She frowned, gesturing with uncertain hands. "Why?" He understood anyway. "Because someone just tried to send me a message, and they used you to deliver it." Her brow furrowed. He continued, quieter. "And because I can't stop thinking about why." They drove in silence through the narrow streets of Naples. The city glowed in the distance, beautiful and cruel. She sat in the passenger seat, hands clasped tightly, every muscle tense. He glanced at her occasionally, the faint bruise along her wrist, the way she leaned toward the window like she might vanish through the glass. At a red light, he spoke without looking at her. "You're not invisible anymore, Nancy. Understand?" Her throat worked. No sound. She nodded once. He smirked faintly, almost sad. "You'll have to learn how to survive being seen." The light turned green. Hours later, the villa was quiet again, the body gone, the blood washed clean. But something inside both of them had changed. He'd killed for her, without hesitation, without reason. And she, despite every instinct screaming to run, had followed him. The world they lived in had laws. Loyalty above love, silence above truth. Yet tonight, those laws had begun to fracture. Pedro stared at the road ahead, jaw tight. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what terrified him more, the violence chasing them or the way her silence was starting to haunt him. When danger finds you, is it protection or obsession if someone won't let you face alone? Comment your thoughts below. Is Pedro saving Nancy or claiming her? The new safe house stood on the edge of the city, smaller than the villa, hidden behind walls of ivy and shadow. It used to belong to one of Pedro's lieutenants before that man disappeared. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nancy hadn't spoken once since the shooting. Not that she could, but her silence now felt heavier, different. It wasn't just fear. It was grief. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, cleaning surfaces already spotless, folding things that didn't need folding, anything to keep her hands busy, anything to stay invisible. Pedro watched her from the doorway of the study. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a pistol lying beside open ledgers. "You don't need to work here," he said finally. She froze, cloth in hand. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "You think I brought you here clean?" Her eyes flicked up, sharp and uncertain. She hesitated, then gestured to herself. "Then why?" His jaw flexed. "Because someone tried to kill you in my house. And because I don't like debts." She frowned, writing something quickly in the small notepad she always carried. She turned it to him. "You owe me nothing." He laughed, dry and humorless. "I disagree." She set the pad down and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Nancy." She turned back. Pedro's tone softened. "Don't run from me." Her eyes burned with something close to defiance. She tore out the page, crumpled it, and threw it at his feet before walking away. For the first time in a long time, Pedro Moretti didn't know whether to follow or let her go. That night, thunder rolled across the city. Rain fell like shattered glass. Pedro sat alone in the dimly lit study, the sound of droplets against the window echoing through the house. He couldn't focus. Every thought turned to her. The way her shoulders tensed when he spoke, the way her hands shook when she thought he wasn't looking. He hated the feeling, vulnerability. He'd spent his life erasing it. But she walked into his world and reminded him that he was still human, still capable of guilt, of longing. The door creaked. He looked up. Nancy stood there, wrapped in a blanket, barefoot, her hair loose from its usual braid. She pointed toward the window. Lightning had killed the lights again. He nodded toward the sofa. "Sit." She hesitated, then did. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses, then pushed one her way. She shook her head. He smirked. "You think I'll get you drunk so you'll talk?" Her eyes flashed, equal parts anger and curiosity. She wrote something down, slid it to him. "You always need control." He read it, and the smirk faded. "Someone has to." Another flash of lightning lit her face, and for first time he saw the faint scar along her neck. Thin, faded, cruel. His breath caught. "They took your voice," he murmured. "Did they take anything else?" Her eyes filled, and she turned away, gripping the blanket tighter. He cursed softly, hating himself for asking. "I'm sorry," he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "I mean—" She reached for the notepad again, hands trembling. "You ask questions you don't want answers to." He met her gaze. "You're right." Silence again, the kind that thickens the air, presses against the chest. He wanted to tell her that her silence scared him because it made him feel something he'd long buried. But instead, he said, "Go rest. It's late." She stood, then paused by the door, turning to look at him. Her lips moved soundlessly, words without voice, but he caught them anyway. "Thank you." And then she was gone. Hours later, Pedro found himself outside her room. He didn't enter, just stood there, hand against the doorframe, listening to the rhythm of her breath through the thin wall. For a man who had faced death 1,000 times, it was strange to realize this. She terrified him more than any bullet ever could, because if she broke, something in him might never recover. Nancy dreamed of screams she couldn't make, of faces without names, of hands pulling her through darkness until the world went silent. She woke with tears on her cheeks, and a sound, a tiny, broken exhale that almost formed a word. Pedro, in the hallway, froze when he heard it. His name, barely there, almost nothing. He leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closed. "Don't do that," he whispered to himself. "Don't hope." By morning, they returned pretending him the untouchable king, her the silent ghost. But something between them had shifted. Every glance held weight. Every silence hummed with something neither dared name. And beneath it all, danger waited, unseen but close, ready to tear apart the fragile thing they were building. Days bled into nights, and the safe house became its own world. A quiet prison built of shared glances and unsaid truths. Pedro worked in the study most hours, making calls, giving orders, cleaning up the mess the Ferrani family had made. Every conversation was clipped, dangerous. He'd learned the rival family wanted to send a message, a warning about an alliance he'd broken. But what unsettled him wasn't the threat. It was how Nancy had somehow been caught in the crossfire. She spent most of her time in the garden behind the house, a narrow strip of green surrounded by high stone walls. The flowers that were wild, half-dead, survivors like her. Pedro watched her sometimes from the window. She moved quietly among them, touching petals as if apologizing for being alive. He told himself it was curiosity. It wasn't. One evening, rain started again. He found her outside, soaked, trying to cover a small rose bush with her shawl. "Nancy," he said sharply, "get inside." She froze and obeyed reluctantly. Her soaked hair clung to her neck, her sleeves dark with water. He sighed, grabbed a towel from the counter, and handed it to her. "You'll catch a fever." She blinked, unsure whether to take it. He tossed it gently over her shoulders anyway. She mouthed a word, "Thank you," then turned toward the fire. Pedro leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You know," he said, "most people would be terrified by now, being stuck in a house with me." She gave a small smile, the first he'd seen. It hit him harder than any bullet. "What's funny?" he asked, intrigued. She wrote on her notepad, then turned it to him. "You act like a monster to see who runs first." He laughed under his breath. "And you haven't." She shrugged, writing again. "I've seen worse." The words froze him. His smirk faded. "I believe you." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, predator and ghost, both pretending they weren't bleeding inside. That night, the storm cut the power again. The safe house fell into darkness. Pedro lit a candle, its light trembling against the walls. He found her in the living room, sitting on the floor with a blanket wrapped around her knees. The faint glow lit her face, making her look almost ethereal. He hesitated before joining her. "You're not afraid of the dark?" She shook her head. "Good," he said softly, "because fear makes noise, and noise gets you killed." Her gaze met his, a quiet challenge. She lifted her hand and wrote something in the condensation on the window beside her. "You talk about fear like it's a weapon." He smiled faintly. "It is." Then she erased the word fear with her finger and wrote love instead. He stilled. The room seemed to shrink around them. "That one," he said quietly, "is far more dangerous." Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. He leaned closer, the flame flickering between them. "Tell me, Nancy," he murmured, "who taught you to survive by silence?" Her eyes glistened, her fingers trembling as she lifted the notepad again. Slowly, she wrote, "Someone who said they loved me." The words hit like a blade. Pedro looked away, jaw tight. He poured himself whiskey just to have something to do. "Then they didn't," he said roughly. She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for the truth behind his voice. Then, softly, she reached out and touched his wrist. Her skin was cold. His pulse jumped beneath it. For a man who had killed without hesitation, it was ridiculous how much that single touch undid him. He didn't pull away. Neither of them spoke. The candle burned lower, wax spilling over the glass. By midnight, the storm had eased. Pedro sat alone, staring at the embers in the fireplace. Every part of him wanted to lock this feeling away, this weakness. But when Nancy stepped back into the room with a blanket and draped it over his shoulders, he didn't stop her. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why do you care?" She hesitated, then wrote one sentence and handed it to him. "Because you asked who hurt me, but you never asked who saved me." He looked up confused, but she was already walking away. Outside, the storm broke fully, the sky clearing above Naples. But inside that house, something irreversible had shifted. Two broken people, both trained by pain, had begun to lean towards something neither could name. He watched her shadow disappear down the hallway, her silence now less like fear and more like a secret. And for the first time since he was a boy, Pedro Moretti wanted to be the man someone could run toward instead of from. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, like the city was holding its breath. Pedro sat in the study, reviewing intel from his men. The Ferranti family had gone quiet. Too quiet. Something was building. He pushed the papers aside, rubbing the back of his neck. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face by candlelight, the way her finger had written love on the window, the way it felt when her hand touched his wrist. It was supposed to mean nothing, but it didn't. When Nancy appeared at the doorway, he didn't hear her until she placed something on the desk, a worn, faded photograph. He looked down. It showed a girl, younger, maybe 17, standing in front of a small bakery. Her smile was soft, unguarded. Pedro's brows furrowed. "You." She nodded. "Where was this?" She wrote, "Palermo, my father's shop." He sat back, watching her carefully. "What happened?" Her eyes darkened. She hesitated, then wrote another word, "Fire." Pedro's stomach sank. "Mafia?" She nodded again, slower this time. He clenched his jaw. "Which family?" Her hand trembled as she scribbled the next word. "Ferranti." The air in the room turned cold. He stood pacing. "They burned your home." She added something else, hands shaking. "They took me, sold me. The man cut my throat when I tried to scream." He froze. Nancy's eyes were wet but defiant, daring him to pity her. She tore the note in half and whispered nothing, just looked at him like silence itself was her revenge. Pedro sank into the chair, every part of him burning. The Ferrantis, his father's enemies. The same bastards who'd murdered his mother when he was a boy. He swallowed hard, meeting her gaze. "You're not a maid," he said quietly. "You're a survivor." Her lips curved in something like a sad smile. "You don't need to save me," she wrote. He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "Maybe I already failed someone like you once." The words slipped out before he could stop them. She frowned, curious. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses, slid one across the desk toward her. "My mother, she was soft like you, believed monsters could be tamed. My father proved her wrong." Nancy's hand hesitated above the glass. He continued, voice lower now. He beat her until she forgot how to smile. "I watched, did nothing. I was 12. The confession hung in the air. 2 wounded souls, both shaped by men who believed power was love. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Nancy reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. For the first time in years, Pedro didn't pull away. That night, he dreamed of fire. Not the kind that destroys, the kind that purifies. And when he woke, he knew exactly what he had to do. He found her in the garden, dawn-light catching on the petals of the half-dead roses she'd been trying to save. He stepped closer, his voice rough. "I'm going to end this." She turned, confused. "The Ferrantis," he said. "Every last one. They don't get to keep breathing while you can't speak." Her eyes widened, horrified. She shook her head violently, signing frantically with her hands. "No, no more blood." He caught her wrist mid-motion. "They took your voice. They burned your life. Don't tell me they don't deserve it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wrote quickly, pressing the notepad against his chest. "If you kill for me, you'll lose what's left of you." He looked at her for a long time, then tore the page in half, not out of anger but despair. He turned away, his voice barely audible. "Maybe that's all I have left to lose." She watched him walk back into the house, her heart pounding. She'd seen men like him before, men born from violence, men who used cruelty like armor. But Pedro wasn't like them. He was breaking from the inside, piece by piece, and she didn't know how to stop it. In the garden, she picked a rose, the one she protected from the rain, and carried it inside. She left it on his desk with a single note. "Not every war needs blood." That night, He found her asleep on the couch, the firelight painting her face in gold. For a long time, he just stood there, watching her breathe. Then quietly he whispered, "Who hurt you?" Again, not as a question this time, but as an oath. She didn't wake, but her hand moved, fingers twitching as if reaching for something in her dream. Maybe forgiveness, maybe him. And Pedro Moretti realized that the only redemption he wanted was the one she'd never asked him for. When someone carries a past built from pain, can love heal them, or does it simply remind them where it hurts most? Speech balloon, comment your thoughts below. Should Pedro avenge Nancy or honor her plea for peace? The days after the storm were quieter. Too quiet. No new attacks. No threats. No calls from his men. Pedro should have felt relief. Instead, the silence unsettled him. It felt like the calm before something devastating. But in that stillness, something unexpected began to take shape between him and Nancy. Something gentler than either of them knew how to name. She started cooking again. It wasn't part of her job. He'd told her that a dozen times. But she did it anyway. The first morning, the smell of fresh bread filled the house. Pedro came down, following the scent, pretending not to be curious. She looked up from the counter as he entered. Hair tied, sleeves rolled, eyes bright with quiet concentration. He frowned at the spread on the table. "You cooked all this?" She nodded. "Are you trying to make me fat?" Her eyes narrowed playfully. She wrote on her notepad, "You skip breakfast too often." He smirked. "So you're keeping track now?" She shrugged, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Someone has to." For the first time since he met her, Pedro laughed, really laughed. The sound startled even him. And just like that, something shifted. They fell into a rhythm, fragile but real. He taught her to play chess on rainy afternoons. She beat him once, then scribbled luck on her pad. He raised an eyebrow. "Luck, huh? Or strategy?" She smiled. "Both." Sometimes he'd catch her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her gaze soft, curious, as if trying to memorize him. Sometimes he found himself doing the same. The nights were hardest, the quietest. Pedro often worked late, reviewing files, planning his next move against the Ferrantes. But more and more, he found himself distracted by the sound of her moving in the next room. The rustle of blanket, the soft creak of floorboards, proof that she was there. One night, as he sat by the fire, she appeared holding a small music box. She wound it once, and a delicate melody filled the room, the kind of song mothers hum to children before sleep. He watched her, mesmerized. "Yours." She nodded, then wrote, "My father made it." The music played on, fragile and haunting. He took the box gently, studying it. "You know, I used to play piano when I was a kid." She blinked, surprised. "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "Didn't fit the image, I know. My father said it made me weak. So I stopped." She wrote, "Do you miss it?" He paused. "Every day." The song ended. Silence followed, warm, not empty. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing his thumb against her hand. "Thank you," he murmured. Her breath hitched. He didn't move away. Neither did she. For a long, suspended moment, the world shrank to that single touch. Two people who shouldn't have met, shouldn't have cared, yet somehow did. The next morning, he found her sitting outside, sketching in the sunlight. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She hesitated, then turned the page toward him. It was a rough sketch of the house, the garden, the faint outline of a man standing in the window. Him. He stared at it, something raw flickering in his chest. "You drew me?" She nodded, smiling shyly. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Be careful, Nancy. People might think you like me." She scribbled something quickly, handed it to him. "Maybe I do." He froze. The air thickened. He searched her face for hesitation, but there was none, only quiet honesty. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't." She tilted her head, eyes soft, questioning. He smiled sadly. "Because I don't know how to love without breaking things." She reached for her pad again and wrote slowly, "Then break me gently." His breath caught. That night, neither of them slept much. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They sat by the fire until dawn, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm draped protectively around her. No promises, no declarations, just a fragile piece of two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't lonely. For the first time in years, Pedro didn't dream of violence or loss. He dreamed of her voice, soft, "Ho," whispering his name. When he woke, he found her hand resting over his heart, and for once, the world felt quiet in a way that didn't hurt. It started with a phone call. Pedro was in the study when it rang, one of his private lines, one that only 3 people knew. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate. "Boss," the man said, "we found something. You want to see it yourself." Pedro's instincts bristled. "What is it?" "Documents. Photos. Records from the Ferrani network. But there's more." Something about the girl. The words hit like a bullet. "Send it to me?" Minutes later, an encrypted file appeared on his computer. He opened it, eyes narrowing as the images loaded. At first, it was nothing. Lists of names, transaction logs, coded shipments. Then one image froze him. Nancy, younger, standing beside a Ferrani soldier. Another image. Her, in the background of a meeting with men he recognized. His enemies. The final one, a signed employment record. Nancy Ferrani. Pedro's heart went still. It had to be fake. It had to. But the seal, the signatures, they were too perfect. He stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. The sound drew Nancy to the doorway, concern etched on her face. He looked at her like he didn't know her anymore. "What is this?" She blinked, confused. He turned the screen toward her. "Tell me it's not true." Her eyes widened. Horror, disbelief, then tears. She shook her head violently, stepping forward, signing frantically with her hands. "No, no, that's not. Don't," he snapped. "Don't lie to me." She froze, pain flashing across her face. She grabbed a notepad, scribbled fast, desperate. "I was taken, forced to work for them. I escaped." He stared at the words, chest tight. "And you didn't think to tell me that." She wrote again, hands trembling. "I was afraid you'd kill me." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think I would find out?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head, pleading silently. He slammed his fist against the desk. "Every word you said, every look, was it all a game?" She stepped forward, shaking, holding out the notepad again. "You were the only person who didn't see me as a monster." He looked at her, eyes burning, fury, heartbreak, something worse. "Get out," he said quietly. She didn't move. His voice broke. "I said get out." Her breath hitched. She turned, slowly, each step like it hurt to take. And then she was gone. Rain started again that night, the kind that came down in sheets, relentless and cold. Pedro stood alone by the window, staring at the reflection of his own face. He hated what he saw, not just anger, but loss. He told himself he didn't care, that it was better this way, that she'd fooled him, used him. But the truth pressed harder. He missed her already. Nancy didn't make it far. By dawn, the Ferrani men found her. 2 cars, blacked out windows, no insignia. They surrounded her on a narrow street outside Naples. She tried to run. They caught her anyway. "Boss wants her back," one of them said. "Alive." She fought, silent, desperate, clawing, but they drug her before she could make a sound. When Pedro's men found the abandoned car hours later, he knew. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the empty seat, the blood on the gravel. Then, softly, he said, "Get every man, every gun. We end this tonight." The war came fast. Ferrani's compound burned before sunrise. Gunfire echoed through the hills. Pedro walked through it like a shadow, pistol in hand, eyes cold. Every bullet had a name. Every scream was penance. He found her in the basement, tied, bruised, barely conscious. "Nancy." Her eyes fluttered open. For a second, she didn't seem to believe he was real. He untied her gently, hands shaking. "I'm here." She tried to speak. A faint sound, broken, half-formed, his name. He froze. Say it again. Lou. It cracked, fragile and beautiful. He gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice breaking. I should have trusted you. She clung to him weakly, shaking her head, no apologies. Gunfire raged above them. He carried her out, shielding her body with his own. By the time the last shots faded, the Ferrani family was gone, burned to ash. But so was something inside him. Later, in the quiet of the same safe house, she lay resting on the couch, her hand bandaged, her voice gone again. The fragile sound from the basement only a ghost now. He sat beside her, exhausted, blood on his shirt, smoke in his hair. When she stirred, her fingers brushed his. He looked at her, eyes hollow. I killed them. She wrote weakly on the pad. I know. He hesitated. Do you hate me for it? She shook her head. You did what I couldn't. He smiled faintly, bitter, broken. And now? She paused, then wrote. Now you have to live for both of us. Her eyes closed. He sat there long after, holding her hand, praying to gods he didn't believe and that she'd wake up again. The world had gone eerily still after the fire. For days, Naples slept under smoke and mourning. Rumors whispered to the underworld that Pedro Moretti had slaughtered the entire Ferrani bloodline in one night. None of them knew why. None dared ask. Inside the safe house, the scent of gunpowder and antiseptic lingered. Nancy lay in the bed near the window, her bandaged hand resting across her stomach. Her skin was pale, her breath shallow but steady. Every so often she'd stir, caught between dreams and pain. Pedro hadn't left her side. He sat there, sleepless, his shirt still stained at the cuffs, eyes hollow from too many nights staring at her instead of the dark. He'd told himself he'd done what needed to be done. That vengeance was justice. But now, watching her sleep, he wondered if he'd simply proven that all monsters eventually become the men they hate. When she finally opened her eyes, the first light of morning had already begun to spill across the room. He was there, of course, still and silent, a statue carved from guilt. Her lips parted soundlessly, and her fingers twitched toward the notepad on the bedside table. He caught it first. Don't, he said softly. You don't have to say anything. But she reached again, stubborn even in weakness. He handed it to her with a sigh. Her writing was shaky. You didn't sleep. He smiled faintly. I was afraid you wouldn't wake. She scribbled another line. You killed them. He nodded once, eyes distant. I did. Why? He looked at her, jaw tight. Because I couldn't let them keep breathing when you couldn't even speak. Her gaze softened, filling with something that looked like sorrow, not gratitude. She wrote, It won't bring my voice back. I know. Then why do you look relieved? He leaned back in the chair, exhaling. Because now there's no one left to hurt you. She stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. You can't build love on ruin, Pedro. The sound of her writing that name, his name, in her fragile script tore something open inside him. He looked away, his voice rough. And what if ruin is all I know how to build? She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was sure. Then learn something else, she wrote. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. She dozed off again. When she woke, he was still there, but this time standing by the window, staring out at the horizon. She watched him in silence, his back straight, shoulders tense. He spoke without turning around. I told myself I was saving you. Her brows furrowed. He continued, quieter now. But I wasn't. I was saving myself. From the guilt, from the memories, from my father's ghost. He turned, eyes meeting hers. You don't owe me forgiveness. I just needed you to know that. Nancy struggled to sit up. He moved to help her, but she shook her head, stubborn as ever. Once upright, she wrote slowly, I'm not angry at you. He frowned. Then what are you? She hesitated, then wrote one word. Tired. He laughed softly, a hollow, broken sound. Yeah, me too. Then she added another sentence, careful and deliberate. But I'm still here. The simplicity of it undid him. He sat beside her, head in his hands, breath shaking. "You shouldn't be," he whispered. "I destroy everything I touch." She reached out, fingers trembling, and cupped his cheek. He froze. Her eyes told him everything she couldn't say. "You didn't destroy me. You found me for a long time." They stayed like that, his forehead resting against her palm, her eyes closed in quiet peace. When she finally withdrew her hand, she scribbled one last message and handed it to him. "You have to choose now." "Choose," he echoed. She nodded. Pride or love? He looked at her, understanding. He could walk away, bury himself in power, pretend this softness never happened, keep the crown of Naples heavy on his head. Or he could stay, risk everything for something fragile, uncertain, human. He stood and walked to the window, the decision burning in his chest. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds for the first time in weeks. He turned back to her, eyes no longer cold. "If I choose love," he said quietly, "it means I stop being who I was." She smiled faintly, weak but sure. Then maybe that's the point. That night, Pedro sat alone in the study, staring at the photograph she'd once shown him. The bakery, the smiling girl, the life she'd lost. He placed it in his wallet beside an old picture of his mother. Two ghosts, one reason keep breathing. And when he finally walked back to her room, he didn't knock. He simply sat down beside her bed, took her hand, and whispered, "I choose you." She didn't wake, but her fingers curled faintly around his. It was enough. 3 months later, the house by the sea smelled of new beginnings. The walls had been repainted, pale cream instead of the cold marble gray. The garden bloomed again, untamed and alive, just the way she liked it. Pedro stood by the balcony, sleeves rolled, a book in one hand, a faint smile on his lips. The scar on his temple had faded, though the night still carried ghosts. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. He turned, and there she was, Nancy. She'd grown stronger. The bruises were gone, the light back in her eyes. She wore a white sundress that fluttered in the morning wind. But more than anything, she looked free. He smiled gently. "You're up early." She nodded, signing small gestures now. Clumsy but clear. "Coffee." He chuckled. "I'll make it." She tapped her wrist twice. "My turn." He raised his hands in surrender. "All right, chef." The air between them was easy now, warm. The kind of quiet that didn't ache. As she moved through the kitchen, humming softly under her breath, he froze. A sound, barely there, a note, fragile, breathy, real. He turned slowly. "Nancy." She looked up, startled, her lips parting, and then she did it again. A whisper like wind through leaves. "Pedro." His heart stopped. Her voice, raspy, weak, but hers. He crossed the distance in seconds, hands trembling as he cupped her face. "Say it again." She smiled through tears. "Pedro." He laughed, not the bitter sound from before, but something purer. "You sound perfect." She shook her head, mouthing, "I sound broken." He leaned closer, pressing his forehead against hers. "No," he whispered. "You sound like home." They took their coffee to the balcony, watching the waves crash below. The world felt new again, or maybe they did. She pulled out her sketchbook, flipping to a page she'd been working on. It was the two of them, sitting on the balcony, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand holding hers. He stared at it for a long time. "You always draw the moments I want to remember," he said softly. She smiled, then wrote, "Because you forget to smile when you're living them." He huffed a quiet laugh. "You're not wrong." Later that day, a letter arrived. One of Pedro's men delivered it personally. No seal, no insignia. Inside was a simple message. "The council offers peace. Naples is yours. No more blood." He read it twice before setting it down. For the first time in his life, there was nothing left to fight for. Nancy saw the look in his eyes, that strange emptiness that came when a man built on war finally met peace. She touched his hand, writing slowly, "What now?" He looked at her, unsure. "I don't know. I've never lived without a target." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe your new target is life." He laughed softly. That's a dangerous mission. You like danger. He leaned in, brushing his lips against her forehead. Only when it comes with you. That evening, as the sun bled gold over the sea, she walked down to the shore barefoot, letting the waves kiss her feet. He followed, watching her, the girl who'd once been silent and scared, now walking toward the horizon like she belonged to it. When she turned back, her hair caught the light, and for a moment he saw the ghost of that first night, her standing in his marble hall, mute broken, trembling under his question, "Who hurt you?" But now, when she met his gaze, there was no fear, only peace. He stepped closer, the tide washing over their shoes. "Can I ask you something?" he said softly. She tilted her head, smiling. "Who healed you?" Her answer came not in words, but in the way she touched his chest, right where his heart was, and whispered, voice trembling but sure, "We did." He closed his eyes, pulling her into his arms. The sea roared, the sky burned, and for once, the world didn't feel cruel. That night, after she fell asleep against his chest, Pedro watched her quietly, tracing invisible lines along her hair. He thought about all the things they'd survived, the lies, the blood, the silence, and wondered if maybe, in the end, love wasn't about saving each other from the darkness, but learning to live with it together. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "Rest now, Bella Mia. No one will ever hurt you again." 6 months later, the bakery reopened on a quiet street corner in Naples. The sign above the door read, "I el cor mudo," the silent heart. Inside, laughter replaced gunfire. The smell of espresso replaced smoke. Pedro worked the counter on slow days, pretending to hate it, but Nancy caught him smiling every time a child laughed at his poor attempts at latte art. Her voice was still fragile, but she used it. Every day, a little stronger. Sometimes, when the last customer left, she'd walk up behind him, touch his shoulder, and whisper, "Who hurt you?" He'd turn, smirking, kissing her hand. No one ever will again. The camera of life pulled back. Two souls who had bled their way to peace, standing together in the soft light of a city that finally forgave them. Because sometimes, even in a world of shadows, love finds its way home. If someone once saw the broken parts of you and chose to love you anyway, would you let them? Comment below. Do you believe love can heal even the darkest hearts? Please subscribe, and drop a comment.